These mountains stand in the middle of the biggest desert on Earth, the Sahara. It stretches right across the width of Africa, 3.5 million square miles of it. At night, it gets so cold that it can freeze. During the day, the sun strikes it so ferociously that the highest land temperatures ever recorded were measured here in the Sahara, 58 degrees centigrade, 137 degrees Fahrenheit. And in turn, those oven-like temperatures rob the land of all its moisture. All in all, there could hardly be a more hostile environment for life on Earth. But it wasn't always this way. And if you want evidence of that, here it is. A group of antelope, probably sable, creatures that can't live anywhere in the Sahara today because there's simply not enough vegetation for them. And these aren't the only wild animals that have been painted on these rocks. A giraffe, a kind of wild goat, probably a mouflon, and antelope. Obviously, at the time these pictures were painted, there was good grazing here. Indeed, there was sufficient vegetation to sustain not only wild animals, but whole herds of cattle. We don't know exactly who drew these pictures. The artists may have been the ancestors of the nomads who today follow their herds of long-horned, piebald cattle just south of the Sahara. But we do know what they looked like because they left their own portraits. They lived here, it seems, some 5,000 years ago. But eventually the rains began to fail, the pastures disappeared, and with it the cattle and their keepers. But there are one or two living survivors from that time. This ancient cypress, to judge from the number of rings in the trunks of others like it, is probably between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. In fact, it was probably already growing here at the time when the last of the paintings were being made. It still bears fertile seed, but there are no little seedlings growing around here to replace it. The land now is far, far too dry for them. Indeed, the cypress itself only survives because it sends its huge roots deep into the ground to tap underground water. The drying out of the Sahara seems to be connected with the great changes in climate that overtook the world at the end of the last ice age. As the glaciers retreated northwards across Europe, so the belt of rains that fell regularly along their southern edge left Africa and moved up into Europe, and the Sahara was robbed of its rains. Indeed, it seems to be that most, if not all, of the great deserts of the world were formed around that time, and most, if not all of them, are therefore comparatively recent environments. To see why deserts lie where they do, we can look at the Sahara from the west. The equator runs away from us across the width of Africa. It's along this line that the sun's rays strike from directly overhead, and therefore with the greatest strength. The heated air rises along the equator and flows away north and south to cooler parts of the world. Because it's warm, it carries with it a lot of moisture. But as it rises and cools, the moisture condenses first to form clouds and then to fall as rain. By the time the air comes down again over the Sahara to the left and the Kalahari to the right, it's lost most of its moisture and creates very few clouds. So the Sahara, with few clouds to shield it from the sun, becomes roastingly hot during the day. And at night, with no blanket of clouds to keep in its warmth, it gets desperately cold. Deserts are not placed symmetrically around the world because the continents themselves are distributed in a very irregular way. They are ridged with great mountain ranges which interfere with the even flow of air, and the spin of the planet itself creates vast eddies in the atmosphere which further complicates things. But even so, deserts do lie in two broad zones on either side of the equator. The pattern in Africa, with the Sahara in the north and the Kalahari and the Namib in the south, has its equivalent in the Americas. South of the lush equatorial jungles of the Amazon, beyond the great range of the Andes, lies the Atacama Desert. On the other side of the equator, beyond the drenched tropical rainforests of Panama, stretch the deserts of Mexico and Arizona. Across the Pacific, the greatest expanse of water on the globe, lies south of the equator, Australia, most of which is covered by desert. Its northern tip gets close enough to the equator to collect some rain. Farther north still, beyond the jungle that blankets Indonesia and Malaysia, Thailand and Burma, across the great snow-covered range of the Himalayas, stretch the vast deserts of Central Asia, Mongolia and the Gobi. And beyond them, as we complete the circuit of the globe, the huge desert of the Middle East that covers Iran, Iraq and Jordan, Syria and Israel, the vast sandy emptiness of Arabia, and runs on to join the Sahara. This is the biggest expanse of waterless land on Earth. Here, as in deserts everywhere, almost nothing moves during the heat of the day. But animals are here. If you want to see what made these tracks, you have to wait until the sun sinks and the desert begins to cool. A striped hyena, one of the commonest of the bigger desert animals in this part of the world. A fennec fox. Fennecs usually live in small family groups and clearly enjoy one another's company. But there's not much time for frolicking. Food must be found. Faint smells from the sand tell them who has moved where since they were last out. As the moon rises, many more creatures emerge. A gecko, just what the fennec wants. A jerboa, it too is looking for food, seeds. Another little seed-eating rodent, a gerbil. And a caracal, a kind of cat, which loves both gerbils and jerboas, if it can get them. A smaller hunter, but nonetheless a deadly one, a scorpion. It is searching for beetles or other small insects, but sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. A black widow spider has set her snare of silk underneath a thorn bush. In the intense struggle, the black widow loses one of her legs. She manages to get more ropes of silk around the scorpion, hampering it still further. The scorpion hangs on to its trophy, but to no purpose. The battle is as good as lost. Methodically, the spider trusses up her victim and hangs it in her larder. Wolves, perhaps surprisingly, are quite common in these Middle Eastern deserts. But they're not the same as the wolves from farther north. They're smaller, lighter coloured, and with only the thinnest fur. And they scavenge as much as they hunt. The cool night is coming to an end. Hunting is over. The animals must go back to their dens and hiding places to shelter from the heat that is to come. The sun returns, and very soon the desert will be heating up once again. The mammals that were active during the night will have to go for shelter, and the day will belong not to them, but to those creatures that get their heat directly from the sun, the reptiles. This is the desert of the American West in Arizona, and we've come here to look at one very special desert reptile, this one. This is the Gila monster, one of only 2 poisonous lizards in the world. Actually, he very seldom uses his poison in defense, and in any case, it's still quite early in the morning, and he's so cold that he isn't very active. But in only about an hour and a half, the desert will get so hot that he won't be able to stand it, and he too will have to go and seek shade. So in this short period of the early morning and in the cool of the evening is the time when he hunts. A tortoise, but he's far too big and well armoured for a Gila monster to tackle. This great nest of sticks, however, looks much more promising. The victim, a desert mouse. The tortoise is on the lookout for food too, but it is a vegetarian. The day is now several hours old. Cool dawn is changing to baking noon. It's time for even a reptile to get out of the sun. Movement generates heat, so now nothing moves unless it absolutely has to. And there are some creatures that remain motionless even when you get within a few inches of them. One of them is sitting down on the ground right in front of me now, though you may find it difficult to see because it's so well camouflaged. It's a poorwill, a kind of nightjar. Fluttering the throat evaporates moisture from the mouth and so cools the bird, and it consumes much less energy than heaving the chest and panting, as many mammals would do in this situation. The sandgrouse of Africa uses the same trick. The sandgrouse chicks start doing it almost as soon as they emerge from the shell. They also immediately peck for seeds, but there's little moisture in a seed, and unless they get a drink, they will die. The responsibility for providing that rests entirely with the male. Every day he flies to water, maybe as much as 25 miles from the nest. First, he fills his own stomach with water. But then, very deliberately, he soaks his belly feathers. These feathers have a special spongy structure so that they can absorb a great deal of water. And once he's got a full load on board, he flies back to his family. At last, the chicks get their drink. No other bird has such an ingenious water-carrying device. The roadrunner of the American deserts provides water for its chicks in a quite different way. This parent bird has collected a cicada for its family. Its nest is up in a cholla cactus. The parent doesn't give its chicks their food immediately. The chick is gulping. The parent bird is producing liquid from its stomach and letting it trickle down its beak. Each youngster gets its share. Another ration of solid food, this time a lizard. And each time, before the meal is handed over, the chicks get a drink, whether they like it or not. During the heat of the day, the parents sit on the nest not to keep the chicks warm, but on the contrary, to keep them cool, by shading them. And the sitting bird not only flutters its throat, but protects itself from the sun by using its tail as a parasol. The ground squirrel of the Namib Desert in southern Africa does the same thing, and very effectively too, carefully angling itself as far as possible to keep its body in the shade. Many animals keep their blood cool with radiators. The hedgehog that lives in the desert of the Middle East has unusually large ears. Blood circulates through capillaries close to the surface of the skin and is cooled by the breeze. The fennec fox's huge ears serve the same purpose. And so do those of the American jackrabbit, which perhaps has the biggest ears of all in proportion to its body. The Dorcas gazelle also has radiator ears and is one of the best adapted of all desert mammals. It's one of the very few that can survive without a drink at all. It gets all the liquid it needs from the vegetation. It doesn't waste liquid as urine, but gets rid of its uric acid as small dry pellets. It's now approaching noon, the hottest time of the day. It's summer, the hottest time of the year, and I'm in one of the hottest places on Earth, Death Valley in the western United States. A thermometer on the ground here has risen to 201 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 94 degrees centigrade. It's so hot that no creature can survive permanently out here. Even at the edge of these sand flats, where the ground is a little more broken, there is no sign of animal life whatever. All animals now have sought the shade and shelter from this ferocious sun. But there are some organisms that can't get out of the sun. Plants, being fixed to the ground, have to stay out in the heat of the day and simply endure. But all of them have special devices to help them to do so. The desert holly, its leaves grow at about 70 degrees to the vertical, so that in the morning when it's less hot and in the evening, and the plant needs light, it presents the face of its leaves to the light, but during the middle of the day it shows only the edges, and so it doesn't heat up so much. Not only that, but the plant extracts salt from the salt-laden ground and excretes it as a white coating on the surface of the leaf, which, like the white costume of an athlete, reflects the heat and so keeps the plant that much cooler. And this, the creosote bush, this is one of the most widespread of plants in American deserts, and its roots are better at extracting the last molecule of water from these parched sands than those of any other American plant. And this has led to a most extraordinary state of affairs that's only just been discovered. It seems that the creosote bush was the first plant to establish itself in the arid sand of the Mojave Desert when the desert first appeared. And once it had established its extensive root system, it extracted moisture from the sand so efficiently that it was extremely difficult for any other plant to grow alongside it. And that applied not only to any other kind of plant, but also to its own seedlings. So an individual creosote bush tended to spread not by setting seeds and producing a new generation, but by sending out new stems around its base. And as these spread outwards, so the stems in the middle tended to die away, and the bush grew into a ring shape like this. So these are not separate individual creosote bushes as it might appear, but this is just one big ring-shaped individual plant. Over the centuries, the rings widened and changed their shape until now some are over 25 yards across, like this one. Of course, the individual stems and leaves of this plant are not very ancient. The first ones to grow that appeared in the middle have decayed and disappeared a long time ago. But now it's estimated that this plant started growing between 10 and 12,000 years ago. In fact, when the Mojave Desert first appeared. And that makes it the oldest known living organism in the world. In the Mojave, the plants may have to survive for as long as 10 years without rain. But if rain falls just a little more frequently, as it does nearby in Arizona, plants can have different survival strategies. To many of us, the very symbol of the desert is the cactus. But in fact, this family of fleshy-stemmed plants lives only in the Americas. There are several hundred species of them, but among the biggest is the saguaro. The saguaro has solved the problems of surviving in great heat and drought very successfully indeed. Its stem is pleated like an accordion, so that when rain does fall, the cactus can expand and quickly absorb as much of the water as possible before it disappears. After a single storm, a saguaro can take up as much as a ton in a few days. Its leaves have become thorns, so reducing the surface area from which the plant might lose water by evaporation. The stem itself is green and has taken over the job of photosynthesis. The thorns protect the young plant from browsers, but they also break up the wind currents, so that the cactus is wrapped, as it were, in still air, and evaporation of moisture from the stem is kept very low. These huge saguaro cacti can live for over 200 years and stand nearly 50 feet high. A big one like this may weigh as much as 8 tons, and 90% of that is water. If I was dying of thirst in this desert, I'd be tempted to cut inside that saguaro and raid its reservoir of water. But that would probably be a mistake, because the water in the saguaro contains a poison. But there are lots of desert-living plants which do have drinkable water within them. And desert-living people all over the world have become expert botanists, able to recognize from just the tiniest little leaflet or straggling stem where they can get a good drink. None are more skilled than the Bushman people of the Kalahari. By the end of the dry season, all their water holes have usually dried up. For liquid, they must now rely almost entirely on plants and their ability to recognize the right ones. This tuber is a kind that provides good drinking water. This much larger one is also full of liquid, but unfortunately it's so bitter it's undrinkable. But it's worth having nonetheless. To extract the water, the roots must be grated and pulped. The bigger root is grated as well. Drier though it is, it still contains valuable fluid. Since it cannot be drunk, the people use it to moisten their skin, and as it evaporates, it brings a delicious, refreshing coolness. "200 miles to the west of the Kalahari lies an even hotter, drier desert, the Namib. Very few plants indeed can survive in these parched sands. Patches of grass sprouted after a rare shower of rain and lived for a few weeks, but that was over 4 years ago, and now only the dusty, withered stems are left. There is one plant that grows here, though, and indeed nowhere else, and one that is very odd indeed." The scientist who first described this extraordinary plant was an Austrian called Dr. Velvich, who came to this part of Africa in the middle of the last century. He discovered many plants in Africa, but this perhaps is his most famous, and the one that bears his name, being called Welwitschia. There are male plants and female plants. This one is a female, and these are the female structures. These are young ones which sprouted this year, and these are the fully developed ones from last year. In structure, they're very like the cones of a fir tree. The male plant has growths rather like stamens which produce pollen. So Welwitschia seems to be a kind of link between coniferous trees and true flowering plants. But the oddest thing about it, perhaps, are its leaves. They grow from the top of its central trunk, and what's more, do so extremely slowly, so that this length of leaf would have taken about 70 years to be produced. But if it hadn't frayed at the edges, it would be about 400 yards long, because this individual plant is thought to be about 1,500 years old. It's these amazing leaves that enable the plant to collect water in this rainless country. The Namib lies close to the western coast of Africa. At dawn, fogs regularly roll in from the Atlantic. As they swirl around the welwitschia, their moisture condenses on the plant's huge leaves. Some droplets are absorbed through cracks in the leaves' skin. The rest of the water is channeled down to the ground, where it's sucked up by roots just below the surface of the sand. The fog also provides life-saving drinks for some of the desert animals. These are darkling beetles. On foggy mornings, they climb to the top of the dunes and stand in lines, head down, abdomen up, slowly marking time. Droplets of water from the fog collect on legs and antennae, and then, as the beetle lifts its feet, trickle down towards its mouth. The Namib's fogs never penetrate very far inland. Those deserts that lie a long way from the sea, therefore, can never receive moisture in such a way. Their water must come from the clouds. Only too often the clouds that do build up above a desert sail off elsewhere without bursting, and the land remains parched. But when eventually rain does come, it's the trigger for immediate and urgent action. 1 or 2 drops are all that's necessary to activate these dead stems. Within half a minute, they're upright. Other plants begin to open their seed heads. None of these plants is alive. All their movements are simply the result of the dead tissues absorbing water. The dead seed heads have held the seeds securely during the drought. Now, since there's been rain and there's a chance of them germinating, they can be distributed. For some plants, the heavy raindrops are enough to dislodge the seeds. Others utilize the physical effects of absorbing water to shoot the seeds away. Now the seeds themselves, lying on the ground, begin to move. As the hairs absorb water, they swell and stiffen, so raising the seed into the right position for its first rootlets to strike straight downwards into the ground. But sometimes in the Arizona desert, maybe once in several years, there are real cloudbursts and the desert is transformed.